Good evening and welcome back. The hour has grown still, and the room around you has begun the slow practice of letting go of the day. The lamps are low, the corners have softened. Whatever the morning brought, whatever the afternoon asked, whatever the evening still holds in its small busy hands, you may begin, now, little by little, to set it down. There is no urgency here. The story we are about to enter is older than urgency. It has waited a long time already. It will wait, patient as a great ship drawn up on a quiet shore, for as much of your attention as you can give before sleep takes you. Let your shoulders settle. Let your jaw rest. Let your hands lie wherever they have come to rest, open or folded, whichever feels more natural to the body that has carried you this far. There is no pose to maintain tonight. There is no question to answer before the morning. The day, with all its rough edges, may now begin its slow folding away into memory, and the night, kind and old, may begin to gather you up. Tonight we enter the story of Jason and the Argonauts, the tale of a young man, a great ship, and a gathering of heroes who sailed to the far edge of the known world to bring back a golden fleece. It is one of the oldest of the Greek voyages, older even than the war at Troy. A story of long water and strange shores, of a ship that could speak, of a princess who worked magic by moonlight, of a sleepless dragon coiled around a tree. Its heart is a journey, out across the sea towards something difficult and shining, and home again, changed, the way every long journey changes the one who makes it. We will move through these images slowly. We will not press them. We will let them rise and fade like figures painted faintly on the wall of an old temple, and the listener may drift into sleep at any point along the way without missing what matters. Get cozy, settle in, and let us begin. You may close your eyes if your eyes wish to close. The story will keep its shape without you watching it. The Greeks who first told it would have understood. They told it in harbour towns and on the decks of ships, in the long evenings when sailors gather and the talk turns to voyages older than any living memory. The teller continued. The listener slept or did not sleep, as the listener wished. The story carried on regardless, the way the sea carries on regardless, moving in the dark whether or not anyone is awake to watch it move. In the beginning of this telling, we must step back to a kingdom in the north of Greece called Colchis, a port city beneath the wooded slopes of Mount Pelias, looking out over a sheltered gulf toward the open sea. The throne of Colchis rightly belonged to a man named Aeson. But Aeson had a half-brother named Pelias, and Pelias was ambitious, and Pelias seized the throne for himself, pushing Aeson aside and ruling in his place. This is one of the oldest shapes a story can take, the rightful king set aside, the throne held by one who took it. And as so often happens in the old tales, the taking of the throne carried within it the seed of its own undoing. For Pelias had received a warning from an oracle. The oracle told him to beware of a man wearing only one sandal. He did not know who this man would be or when he would come, but the warning lodged in him, and he watched the roads and the harbours, and he waited, with the particular unease of one who has taken something he was not given, and knows that a reckoning may one day arrive on the road wearing a single sandal. The years passed, and no such man came. And perhaps Pelias began to hope the oracle had meant nothing after all. But oracles in the old world are patient. They do not hurry. They wait the way a river waits until the appointed day arrives in its own time. Aeson, the displaced king, had a son. The child was named Jason. Fearing that Pelias might kill the boy to remove any rival claim to the throne, Jason's family did what the families of endangered children so often did in the old myths. They spread the word that the infant had died, and they wept false tears at a false burial, and they carried him secretly away, up the slopes of Mount Pelion to the cave of the wise centaur Charon. And there in the high mountain air, far from the dangerous court below, Jason was raised. Charon was the wisest of the centaurs, half man and half horse, gentle and learned and old beyond reckoning, the teacher of many heroes across many generations. He had taught Asclepius the art of healing. He would teach Achilles in a later age. Now he took the small displaced prince of Iolcus and raised him in the way he raised all his charges, with patience and clear knowledge, teaching him the use of weapons and the binding of wounds, the names of the herbs and the courses of the stars, the old courtesies, the music of the lyre, and above all the bearing of a man who would one day have to claim what was his without bitterness and without cruelty. Jason grew strong and fair on the mountain. He grew too into the knowledge of who he was, the son of the rightful king, raised in secret, waiting for the day he would go down the mountain to claim his inheritance. Charon, who could see something of what lay ahead, did not shield him from the knowledge that the claiming would not be easy. He prepared the boy for a hard road, as he prepared all his heroes, knowing that the gift of strength is also the burden of being asked to use it. When Jason was grown, that day came. He came down from Pelion and set out for Iolcus to claim his birthright. On the way, he came to a river in flood, swollen and fast, brown with the runoff of the high snows, difficult and dangerous to cross. At the riverbank stood an old woman, bent and frail, asking to be carried across the water. Other travellers, the story implies, had passed her by, unwilling to risk the current for a stranger. But Jason, who had been raised by Charon to honour the weak and the old, lifted her onto his shoulders and waded into the flood. The water pulled hard at his legs. The footing was treacherous, the stones rolling under him, and in the crossing one of his sandals stuck fast in the mud of the riverbed and was lost, so that he came up onto the far bank wearing only one, and set the old woman gently down and thought no more of it, and walked on. The old woman, the story tells us, was no old woman at all. She was the goddess Hera, queen of the gods, who had taken that shape to test the young man, and who had been waiting for years for a champion of her own in her long quarrel with Pelias, for Pelias had slighted her and failed to honour her properly at her altars. Many travellers had passed the old woman by. Jason had carried her across the dangerous water without knowing who she was, and from that moment Hera became his protector, watching over the whole long voyage that lay ahead, her favour the unseen current beneath everything that followed. But Jason did not yet know any of this. He only knew that he had lost a sandal in the river, and he walked on into Iolcus wearing one, not knowing that the oracle had spoken of exactly such a man, not knowing that his arrival was the very thing Pelias had spent his whole reign dreading. When Jason came into the city and stood before Pelias, the king looked down and saw the single sandal, and the old warning rose cold in his memory. Here was the man the oracle had named. Pelias was afraid, but he was also cunning, and he did not move against Jason openly, for Jason had come with a just claim, and the people knew the old story of the displaced king, and a king who murders a rightful heir in his own hall earns the hatred of his people. So Pelias hid his fear behind a careful courtesy. He welcomed Jason. He acknowledged him. And then he asked the young man a careful question, the kind of question that seems innocent and is not. He asked what a man should do if he learned that one of his own people was fated one day to destroy him. Jason, perhaps prompted by Hera to give exactly this answer, said that such a man should be sent to fetch the Golden Fleece, an errand so difficult and so far that it amounted to a sentence of exile or of death. And so Pelias turned the answer gently back upon the one who had given it. He agreed that Jason's claim to the throne was just. But before Jason could take up the kingship, he said, he must first prove himself worthy of it by accomplishing a great deed for the kingdom, a deed that would wipe away an old stain upon the house. He must sail to the far eastern edge of the world, to the kingdom of Colchis at the foot of the Caucasus Mountains, and bring back the Golden Fleece. Pelias believed in his secret heart that Jason would never return, that the voyage itself would do the work that he dared not do with his own hand. And Jason, young and eager to prove his worth, and perhaps a little vain of his own courage, accepted the quest, not fully understanding how far Colchis lay, nor across what seas, nor what guarded the thing he was being sent to fetch. Here we should pause and speak of the fleece itself, for it has its own story, older than Jason. Years before, there had been two children, a boy named Phrixus and a girl named Helle, who were in danger from a cruel stepmother who plotted their death. To save them, a wondrous ram with a fleece of gold, sent by the gods, came down and carried them away upon its back through the air, flying eastward over the sea. As they flew, the girl Helle, dizzy at the height or weary of holding on, lost her grip and fell into the water at a narrow strait, which was named after her, the Hellespont, the Sea of Hell, ever after. We will pass her falling gently, the way the sleep story passes all such sorrows, marking only that the strait has carried her name for 3,000 years, so that even her falling became a kind of remembering. The boy Phrixus held on, and was carried safely to Colchis, far in the east, where the king received him kindly. There the golden ram was sacrificed to the gods in thanks, and its fleece was hung in a sacred grove on the branch of an oak and set under the guard of a great serpent, a dragon that never slept. The fleece became the treasure of Colchis, the sign of its favor and its wealth, and it hung in the dim grove year after year, golden in the green shadow, watched over by the slow coils of the unsleeping guardian. This was the thing Jason had been sent to bring home. Jason could not make such a voyage alone. He needed a ship and he needed a crew, and both of these became part of the wonder of the story. The ship was built by a master craftsman named Argus, and after him it was called the Argo, and those who sailed in it were called the Argonauts, the sailors of the Argo. The goddess Athena herself helped in the building, guiding the craftsman's hands, and into the curved prow of the ship she set a beam cut from the sacred speaking oak of Dodona, an oak whose wood retained the gift of prophecy, so that the Argo could speak to its crew with a living voice, warning them, guiding them, sometimes grieving with them. It was a ship unlike any other, the largest and finest yet built in the Greek world, 50 oars along its sides, and the launching of it was the beginning of the great age of sea voyages, the first long passage out toward the unknown edges of the water. When it was finished and the time came to drag it down to the sea, the heroes set their shoulders to it together, and it slid down the rollers into the waves and floated, and the long adventure could begin. And then there was the crew, and here the old singers delighted, for Jason sent out a call across all of Greece, and the greatest heroes of the age answered it. They came from every land. There came Heracles, the strongest of all mortals, in the midst of his own famous labours, lending his great strength to the voyage for a time. There came Orpheus, the supreme musician, whose lyre could calm storms and soften stones, and whose song would prove, more than once, to be worth more than any sword. There came the twin brothers, Castor and Pollux, the sons of Tyndareus and of Zeus, one a master of horses and the other a master of boxing, who would later be set among the stars. There came Zetes and Calais, the winged sons of the north wind who could rise into the air and fly. There came Lynceus, whose eyes were so sharp that he could see through solid earth and across great distances of sea. There came Taphis, the finest helmsman in Greece, who could read the water and the weather and the stars and bring a ship safe through passages that would wreck any other. There came Idmon, a seer who could read the will of the gods and who had foreseen, in coming on the voyage, his own death upon it, and had come anyway, because a brave man does not refuse a great deed merely because he has glimpsed its cost. There came Pelias, who would one day be the father of Achilles, and his brother Telamon, who would father the great Ajax. There came, in some tellings, the huntress Atalanta, swift and fierce and the equal of any man aboard. They were the flower of the heroic age, gathered onto a single ship, bound for the edge of the world. The Argo put out to sea, and the long voyage began. It is a voyage of many adventures, and we will move through them slowly, the way one moves through the stages of a long journey when there is no hurry to arrive. The sea was wide, the shores were strange. Each landfall brought its own wonder, its own danger, its own lesson, and between the landfalls there was only the water, and the rhythm of the oars, and the wooden voice of the ship, and the slow turning of the stars overhead. The heroes took it in turns at the oars, and in the evenings when they drew the ship up on some quiet beach and lit their fires, Orpheus would take up his lyre and sing. and the songs carried out over the dark water. And the men who would later be famous for their deeds sat quietly and listened, the way men listen to music at the end of a long day of effort. There was one night, early in the voyage, when a quarrel began to rise among the heroes, as quarrels will rise among strong men cooped together on a narrow ship, two of them disputing hotly over some small matter of pride, until it threatened to split the company before they had even truly begun. And Orpheus, seeing the trouble, did not take a side, and did not raise his voice. He took up his lyre instead, and he sang. He sang of the very beginning of things, of how the earth and the sky and the sea had once been mingled together in a single shapeless form, and how they had been parted, the land settling, the sky lifting, the sea finding its place. He sang of the first stars and the first dawn, of the rising of the mountains and the gathering of the rivers, of the old powers who ruled before the gods of Olympus, and of how the rule of the world had passed down the long generations until it came to Zeus. And as he sang, the quarrel forgot itself. The angry men fell silent. They sat with their cups untasted, leaning toward the song, and when at last the music ended, they sat a while longer in the stillness, reaching out their hands toward the sound as though to call it back. The quarrel did not return. The Greeks loved this small scene, for it showed them that the deepest peacemaker in the company was not the strongest fighter nor the cleverest counselor, but the singer who could quiet anger not by argument, but by reminding men, through music, of how large and how old the world is, and how small their quarrel was beneath the slow turning of the stars. Their first long stay was on the island of Lemnos. A strange and terrible circumstance had left the island peopled only by women, who had been long without men, ruled now by a young queen named Hypsipyle. The women of Lemnos received the Argonauts with welcome, glad of their company, and the heroes were made much of and feasted, and the days on the soft island slid by pleasantly, one into the next. They lingered there far longer than they had meant to, in comfort and ease, the way travellers will linger in a pleasant harbour when the hard road is still ahead and the present moment is kind. A whole season nearly slipped away. It was Heracles, in most tellings, who finally roused them. He had stayed by the ship, impatient, and he came at last and reminded them, plainly and without flattery, that they had not crossed the sea to find rest on a soft island, that the fleece would not fetch itself from the far end of the world, that the heroic life is not lived in pleasant harbours, but on the hard road between them. The reproach stung, because it was just. So they took their leave of the women of Lemnos and put out again, and the voyage resumed, and the soft island fell away behind them into the haze. They came next to the land of the Doliones and their young king Cyzicus, who received them as friends and feasted them well and sent them on their way with goodwill. But the sea played them a cruel trick. After they had sailed on, a contrary wind rose in the night and drove them back, in the darkness, to the very shore they had just left, and neither the Argonauts nor their hosts recognized one another in the blackness, and each took the other for an enemy raider come in the night, and they fought there on the dark beach, and the young king Cyzicus fell in the confusion before the grey morning came and showed them their terrible mistake. We will pass this sorrow gently. The heroes, when they understood what they had done, were stricken with grief, and they held the funeral of the friend they had killed without knowing him, and the whole company mourned, and learned the hard old lesson that the night and the storm can turn friend against friend, and that not every wound a brave man deals is dealt to an enemy. Then the weather cleared, and they sailed on with heavier hearts. It was on the next part of the voyage that they lost Heracles, and the manner of the losing is one of the tender, quiet passages of the tale. The Argo put in at a shore in the land of Mycenae to take on fresh water and to rest. Heracles' young companion, Hylas, a beautiful youth whom the great hero loved and watched over and was raising toward manhood, went off alone into the woods with a pitcher to fill it at a forest spring. But the nymphs of the spring, charmed by his beauty in the green light, reached up out of the water and drew him down, and the dark pool closed over him, and he was gone, without a cry that anyone could hear. Heracles, when he found that Hylas had not returned, would not leave. He plunged into the forest and searched it through the night, calling the boy's name among the trees, refusing to give up, refusing to go back to the ship. And so the Argo, in the end, sailed without him, leaving the strongest of all heroes behind on a lonely shore, searching for a boy who would not come back. There was a quarrel aboard about whether they should have left him, and the sea god Colchis rose from the water to tell them it was the will of the gods, that Heracles had his own labours yet to finish and was not fated to complete this voyage. The old singers told it as a thing both sad and fitting, that even Heracles, whom no monster could stop, could be stopped by love, and by the refusal to abandon someone he could not find. They came next to the land of the Bebrycians, ruled by a brutal king named Amycus, a huge and savage man, a son of Poseidon, who had made a cruel law. No stranger could pass through his country or take on water at his shores until he had first boxed against the king himself, and Amycus was so strong and so without mercy that he had killed every challenger, and the bones of travellers lay around his seat. When the Argo landed, Amycus came down and made his harsh demand. And it was Pollux, the great boxer among the twins, who stepped forward to answer him, slight beside the giant king, but quick and skilled and calm. They bound their hands and faced each other on the shore while both crews watched. Amycus came on with brute force, swinging great blows meant to end the fight at once. But Pollux slipped aside from the wild strength of the king, letting the big man tire himself, watching, waiting, striking cleanly when the opening came, until at last he landed the blow that finished it, and the cruel king who had killed so many strangers was himself brought down. The Bebrycians rushed forward in anger, but the Argonauts drove them back, and the heroes took on their water freely and sailed on, and the cruel law of that shore was ended. The Greeks loved this story, for it set skill and self-command against brute force and savagery, and let the cooler head and the trained hand win. They sailed on, and came to the land of the seer Phineus, an old blind king who had once been given the gift of prophecy, but who had used it without proper restraint, revealing too much of the gods' counsel to mortals, and had been terribly punished for it. Whenever food was set before him, foul-winged creatures called the Harpies, the Snatchers, would swoop down out of the air and seize the food away and befoul whatever they left, so that the old man, who could see the future but could not see, was slowly starving, never able to take a single meal in peace. The Argonauts arrived, and the old seer knew them, for he had foreseen their coming, and he begged them for help, telling them it was fated that the winged sons of the north wind, who were among them, should be the ones to free him. So when the Harpies came shrieking down upon Phineus's table, Zetes and Calais rose into the air on their wings and drew their swords and chased them, up and away across the sky, far over the sea, until a messenger of the gods bade them turn back, promising that the Harpies would trouble the old man no more. The winged brothers returned, and Phineus ate his first peaceful meal in years. In gratitude, the old seer gave the Argonauts the thing they most needed, more precious than gold, knowledge of the road ahead. He could not tell them everything, for the gods do not permit a seer to reveal all, but he told them what they most needed to know to survive the worst of it. He warned them of the dangers between them and Colchis, and he told them of the perils of the return, and above all he told them the secret of the great gate that lay just ahead, the worst passage in all the sea. And he told them one thing more, a quiet thing, that they should trust in the goddess Aphrodite, that their whole success would turn, in the end, not on strength or seamanship, but on love, though he did not say how. They did not understand him then. They would understand him later, on a far shore, when a king's daughter looked at Jason and could not look away. He told them, too, of the long road that lay ahead, naming the shores they would pass in order, the way a man who knows a coast will name its headlands for a stranger who must sail it in the dark. He told them of the rivers that came down to the sea on the southern shore, and of the peoples who lived along them, some kind and some cruel. He told them where they might land in safety and where they must not land at all. He told them of the island of the bronze-winged birds and how to pass it. He told them that when they reached Colchis at last, they should go softly and seek their end by craft and persuasion rather than by force. For the king there was powerful, and the fleece was well guarded, and a small band of foreigners could not take it by strength of arms. And he set around all this knowledge the gentle reminder he had given before, that they should trust in the goddess of love, for she would prove, in the end, a stronger ally than any weapon. The heroes listened and remembered, and the old man's words went with them like a chart held in the mind, so that again and again, in the days to come, they would find themselves arriving at exactly the place the blind seer had described, and knowing what to do because he had told them. For ahead of them lay the Symplegades, the clashing rocks, two vast dark cliffs at the mouth of a narrow strait that crashed together without warning, grinding to splinters anything caught between them, and then drew apart again to wait, in a terrible patience, for the next thing to enter the gap. No ship had ever passed them and lived. Phineus had told them the trick of it. When they came to the rocks, They were to release a dove and let it fly ahead through the gap. If the dove passed through, they would know the rocks would open again in time, and they must row with all the strength in their bodies in the very moment the cliffs drew back, following the dove through before the stone could close again. And so they did. When they came to the clashing rocks, the air itself shaking with the boom and grind of stone striking stone, the sea boiling white in the narrow gap, they loosed the dove and it darted through, and the rocks crashed shut behind it, clipping only the feathers of its tail. Then the rocks groaned apart, and Tiphys the helmsman, calm at the steering oar in the middle of that chaos, pulled the stroke, and every Argonaut bent to the oars together. And the Argo leapt forward into the gap. The rocks began to close. The white water tossed the ship. And in the last instant, the goddess Athena herself, watching over the work of her own ship, set her hand against the rock and held it back a moment, and gave the stern a push, and the Argo shot through, losing only the very tip of its stern ornament, exactly as the dove had lost only its tail feathers. And from that day, the old story says, the clashing rocks were rooted fast and never moved again. For it was fated that once a ship passed safely through, their crashing would cease forever. The Argonauts had opened the way to the eastern sea, and behind them the great gate stood still and silent at last, two ordinary cliffs at the mouth of a strait, their terror spent. But the eastern sea took its own toll before they reached Colchis, and the toll fell on two of the best. In the land of the Mariandini, where they stopped to rest, the seer Idmon, who had foreseen his own death on the voyage and come anyway, was killed by a wild boar that charged from the reeds by the river. And soon after, the master helmsman Tiphys, the finest in Greece, the steady hand that had brought them through the clashing rocks, fell ill and died, and the heroes were cast down. For it seemed to them that without their helmsman they could never bring the ship home across such seas. We will pass these deaths gently. They held the funerals with honour, and they mourned. And then another of their number, a steady man named Anchius, took up the steering oar, for a great voyage cannot stop, because it has lost good men, and the ones who remain must take up the work of the ones who are gone. So the Argo sailed on, under a new hand, eastward, toward the foot of the mountains, toward the kingdom they had crossed the world to reach. They came, on this last stretch of the eastward voyage, to a small barren island sacred to Ares, the god of war, and here they met a strange danger out of the air. For the island was home to a flock of birds with feathers of bronze, which they could loose like arrows from their wings, raining the sharp metal feathers down upon any who landed there. One of these feathers struck a man among the crew before they understood the peril. But Phineus had warned them of this place and told them the trick of it, the same trick by which Heracles had once driven off the birds of the Stymphalian marsh. So the heroes put on their helmets and raised their shields above their heads to make a roof of bronze, and half of them rowed while the other half beat their spears upon their shields and raised a great shout, a clamour of metal and voices, and the birds, terrified by the noise they had never heard before, rose up in a dark cloud and flew away over the sea and did not return. And the Argonauts landed safely on the island the birds had guarded, and there upon that same island they found 4 young men, castaways, shipwrecked and clinging to the wreckage of their vessel, half drowned and despairing. The heroes took them aboard and warmed them and heard their story, and it was a story that bound them to the voyage in a way none of them had expected. For these 4 were the sons of Phrixus, the very boy who had ridden the golden ram to Colchis so long ago. They were the grandsons of King Aeetes himself, setting out from Colchis toward Greece to claim an inheritance when the storm had wrecked them on the island of the war god. So the Argonauts, who were sailing toward Colchis to take the fleece, had rescued the grandsons of the king who guarded it, and the sons of Phrixus, grateful for their lives and no friends of their hard grandfather, agreed to guide the heroes to Colchis and to help them as they could. The old singers loved this turn, the way the threads of an old story draw together across the generations. The ram that carried the boy to Colchis, now bringing the boy's sons back to meet the men who came for the ram's golden fleece. At length the sea narrowed and the land closed in, and the great snow-capped wall of the Caucasus rose ahead, and at its foot they came to the far shore they had sailed so long to find, the kingdom of Colchis, ruled by King Aeetes, a son of the sun god Helios himself, a hard and suspicious king who wore upon him something of his father's fierce brightness and none of his father's warmth. His halls were rich and strange, the work, the old story says, of the smith god Hephaestus himself, who had made for the Sun King's sun fountains that ran with milk and wine and oil, and great bronze-hoofed bulls that breathed fire, gifts from one worker of marvels to the family of the sun. The Argonauts came up from their ship across a misty plain, hidden for a time in a divine mist that Hera drew about them so they might pass unchallenged to the gates, and they entered the strange bright courts of the Sun King's house with wonder and with caution. There Jason saw, for the first time, the daughters of the house, and among them Medea, though he did not yet know what she would become to him. And the king, when he learned why these foreigners had come, was filled with a cold anger, for he had no intention whatever of giving up the Golden Fleece, the treasure and the luck of his whole kingdom, to a band of strangers who had appeared out of the western sea. But he hid his anger, for the laws of hospitality bound even him, and he received them at his table. Jason came before him and asked, with all the courtesy Chiron had taught him, for the fleece, offering to perform any service the king might name in return, and offering, too, the help of the Argonauts against any enemy the king wished subdued. And Aeetes, like Pelias before him, hid his refusal behind a task he was certain no man could survive. Jason must yoke 2 great bulls with hooves of bronze and breath of fire, bulls that snorted flame and that no man had ever harnessed, and with them plough a wide field. Then he must sow that field, not with seed, but with the teeth of a dragon. And from those sown teeth there would spring up out of the earth a crop of armed warriors, full grown and armoured, and ready to kill, who would turn at once upon the man who had sown them. All of this in a single day, alone. It was an impossible task, designed, like the whole voyage, to end in the death of the one who attempted it. And Jason, looking across the field at the fire-breathing bulls stamping in their pen, the smoke rising from their nostrils, must have known in his heart that no strength of his own could carry him through it. But here the story turns, as it has been quietly preparing to turn ever since Phineas spoke of love, upon the figure who is in many ways its true centre, Medea, the daughter of King Aeetes, a princess of Colchis, who was also a priestess of the dark goddess Hecate, deeply skilled in herbs and potions and the old moonlit arts of magic. For the goddesses who favoured Jason, Hera and Athena, knowing that the task could not be won by mortal strength, had gone to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and asked her to make the king's daughter fall in love with the young stranger, so that her great magic might be turned to his aid. And Aphrodite had sent her son Eros, the small winged archer whose arrows none can resist, and he had loosed a shaft. And Medea, seeing Jason standing in her father's hall, fair and grave and in mortal danger, was struck through the heart with a sudden love she had not chosen and could not refuse. What followed was Medea's long inner struggle, and the old singers told it with unusual tenderness and unusual honesty, for it is the struggle of a young woman caught between her love for a stranger and her loyalty to her father, her home, and everything she has ever known. She lay awake through a long night, and her heart was torn in two directions, and the poets followed every turn of it. To help Jason was to betray her father, to use her sacred art against her own house, to leave her family forever, to abandon her country and her name, and cast her whole life upon the faith of a foreign man she had known for a handful of days, a man who might keep faith with her, or might not. To refuse him was to keep her honour and her home, and to watch the next morning while the fire of the bulls consumed the only person she had ever loved. She wept, she rose and went to the door and turned back. She told herself she would let him die and could not bear it. She told herself she would help him and was ashamed. 3 times, the old poem says, she set out to go to him, and 3 times she turned back, until at last love overcame everything else, as the goddesses had arranged that it should, and she gathered her courage and her charms and went out in the night to meet him at the temple of Hecate, and offered him her help, and asked him only to swear that he would keep faith with her and take her with him when he sailed. And he swore it, there in the dark, by the goddess's altar. And the swearing of that oath set in motion everything that came after, the winning of the fleece, and the long happiness, and the long grief, all of it. She gave him an ointment made from a magical herb, a herb that had sprung, the story says, from the blood of Prometheus, where it had fallen upon the earth. She told him to anoint his body and his shield and his spear with it before the dawn, and that for a single day it would make him proof against fire and against bronze, unconquerable, beyond the reach of any wound. And she told him the secret of the sown warriors, that when the armed men sprang up full-grown from the earth, he must throw a great stone into the very midst of them, and they, not knowing where the stone had come from, would each accuse the others, and fall to fighting among themselves, and so destroy one another. And he need only stand back and cut down the few that remained at the end. She told him, too, of a rite he must perform alone at the dead of night to win the favour of her dark goddess Hecate, the mistress of the moon and the crossroads and the old hidden arts. So in the deepest hour of that night, Jason went apart by himself to the bank of a river, and bathed in the cold dark water, and wrapped himself in a dark cloak, and dug a round pit in the earth as Medea had instructed, and made there the offering she had taught him, pouring out the libation, speaking the old words in a low voice, calling upon the goddess by her secret names. And the story says that the goddess heard him, and came, terrible and unseen, the earth trembling faintly under his feet, and a sound like distant baying in the dark around him, and that Jason did exactly as Medea had warned him, performing the rite without once looking behind him, and walking back to his companions without turning his head, for to look upon the goddess as she came would have undone everything. He kept his eyes ahead. He did the thing rightly. And the favour of Hecate, won in the dark by the river, lay upon him when the sun rose on the day of the impossible tasks. And so, at dawn, before the watching king and the gathered people of Colchis and his own anxious companions, Jason did the impossible thing. Anointed with Medea's charm, he walked up to the fire-breathing bulls and took them by their horns and forced the heavy bronze yokes down onto their necks, untouched by the flame that played around him, and he drove them up and down the wide, hard field, ploughing the dark furrows while the fire of their breath broke harmlessly against his charmed skin. And when the field was ploughed, he sowed the dragon's teeth into the furrows. And as the sun climbed, the earth began to stir, and out of the dark soil rose the points of spears, and then helmets, and then the armed men themselves, a whole crop of warriors standing up out of the ground, bristling and ready. Jason, remembering Medea's word, lifted a great stone, more than 2 men could ordinarily move, and hurled it into the midst of them. And in the confusion each warrior turned upon his neighbour, accusing, striking, and the field that had been sown with teeth was reaped with their own swords, the earth-born men cutting one another down, until only a few were left, dazed and weakened, and these Jason cut down himself. And the impossible task was finished by the time the sun went down. Aeetes watched from his place, his face dark, and understood that his daughter must have helped the stranger. For no mortal could have done what Jason had done unaided, and his suspicion hardened into a cold rage, and he resolved that very night to destroy the Argonauts by treachery, and to keep the fleece by force, for he had never for one moment meant to give it up. But Medea, who knew her father's mind better than anyone, came to Jason in the dark and warned him. They must take the fleece at once, that very night, and flee before the king could move against them. So she led Jason and a few companions through the sleeping land to the sacred grove, where the fleece hung golden on its oak, They went on foot in the dark, the princess leading, knowing every path of her father's land, and they came at last to the edge of the grove, where the great trees stood close, and the air was still and heavy, and the only light was the soft, impossible glow of the fleece itself, hanging on its branch, shining faintly in the deep shadow like the first light of a dawn that never quite arrived. And around the trunk of the oak, coil upon slow coil, lay the guardian, the great serpent that never slept, ancient and vast, its scales catching the glow of the fleece, its endless body wound around the tree, its eyes always open and watchful in the green dark, its long hiss carrying through the grove like the sound of a far storm moving over the sea. It had kept this watch for longer than anyone could say, never once closing its eyes, never once resting, the most faithful and the most weary guardian in all the world. And here Medea's magic did its gentlest and most wonderful work. She came forward calmly, and she sang to the dragon, a low, slow song, and she sprinkled upon its eyes a charm steeped in the very essence of sleep. And she chanted in a soft voice the old words that bring rest to the restless. And slowly, for the first time in all its long, ageless watch, the unsleeping guardian grew heavy. Its great head, which had never once sunk down, began to droop. Its always open eyes, which had never once closed, grew dim, and then closed, and the vast coils relaxed against the tree, and the serpent slept. And while it slept, peaceful at last, Jason reached up and lifted the Golden Fleece down from the branch of the oak, and it shone in his hands in the darkness like a fallen piece of the sun, and the thing he had sailed to the very end of the world to find was his at last. They fled to the ship through the night, Jason and Medea and their companions, the fleece carried aboard, and they ran out the oars and put to sea before the dawn. And behind them King Aeetes, discovering the theft and the flight of his own daughter, launched his swift ships in furious pursuit, vowing to bring her back and to destroy the men who had taken his treasure and his child. The voyage home became a long flight across strange and unknown waters, the Colchians close behind, the open sea ahead, no clear road home. We will pass over the darkest moments of that flight gently, for the escape from Colchis had its cruelties, and choices were made in fear and in haste that would cast long shadows over the years to come, and the sleep story does not press such things. We will say only that the pursuit was at last broken and turned back, that some of the Colchians, unable to return to their angry king empty-handed, settled in foreign lands rather than face him, and that the Argo, freed of its pursuers, turned its prow toward home and began the long strange return, by far rivers and unfamiliar seas, across waters that the Greeks themselves were never quite sure how to name. The return voyage held its own marvels and its own trials, and several of them are worth the telling tonight, for the way home was in some tellings longer and stranger than the way out. They wandered far. They passed, in some accounts, up great rivers and across to other seas, carried by routes that no map could hold, for they had gone past the edge of the known world and had to find their way back from beyond it. The goddess Hera watched over them still, smoothing the worst of the dangers, for she had not forgotten the young man who carried her across the flooded river when she wore the shape of an old woman. They came, on the way home, to the island of the Sirens, those singers whose song was so unbearably sweet that sailors who heard it forgot all else, forgot home and food and life itself, and turned their ships toward the rocks to be closer to the voices, and so were broken and lost. And the green island was white with the bones of those the song had drawn to their deaths. The Argonauts heard the first notes of that song drifting across the calm water, and felt the terrible pull of it, and one young man among them, the story says, was so taken that he made to leap into the sea toward the voices. But aboard the Argo was Orpheus, the greatest musician in the world. And Orpheus saw the danger, and took up his lyre, and played, and sang, louder and stronger and sweeter than the sirens, pouring out a music so beautiful that it drowned their voices entirely, so that the crew heard only his song, and bent again to the oars, and rowed on past the island unharmed. It is a lovely thing the old singers gave us there, that the way past the deadly song was not to stop the ears or to bind the body to the mast, but to answer it with a better song. The right music, freely given, can carry a soul safely past the music that would destroy it. They passed, too, through the strait of the wandering rocks, the Planctae, where the sea boiled and great rocks were flung about in the churning water, and flame and smoke rose from a burning mountain on the shore, a passage even more dangerous, some said, than the clashing rocks had been. And here Hera sent help of a particular kind. She called upon Thetis, the gentle sea goddess, who would one day be the mother of Achilles, and Thetis came with all her sister sea nymphs, the Nereids, the daughters of the old sea, and they gathered around the labouring ship in the wild water, and they guided it through, passing it from hand to hand among them, like girls playing at the edge of the surf with a ball, steadying it, lifting it over the worst of the surges, keeping it off the rocks, until it came safe out the far side. It is one of the kindest images in the whole voyage, the great ship full of heroes carried gently through the deadly water by the hands of the sea nymphs, as though the sea itself, which had threatened them so often, had at last decided to cradle them. They came at length to the island of the Phaeacians, a kind and seafaring people ruled by the wise old king Alcenius and his good queen Arete. And here they found rest and welcome at last. But here too the pursuit caught up with them, for another band of Colchians, who had taken a different route, arrived demanding that Medea be handed over and returned to her father. King Alcenius, a just man, considered the matter, and ruled that if Medea was still an unmarried girl, she must be returned to her father, but if she were already the wedded wife of Jason, then she belonged with her husband and could not be taken from him. And the queen Arete, who pitied the young woman, sent word of this ruling quietly in the night. And so Jason and Medea were married at once. That very night, in a sacred cave on the island, their wedding bed spread in the old tale with the Golden Fleece itself. And the nymphs of the island scattered flowers, and Orpheus sang the wedding song. And in the morning Medea was a wedded wife, and could not be taken, and the Colchians, unable to return to Aeetes, settled among the Phaeacians and gave up the chase. So the marriage that had been sworn by Hecate's altar in far Colchis was made true at last in a cave on a western island, with the fleece for a marriage bed. There was one last great trial before home, and it came not from any monster but from the bare and terrible face of the earth itself. A great storm caught the Argo and drove it far off course, south to the coast of Libya, and cast it up on a desolate shore where a vast shoal of sand stretched away on every side. No water deep enough to float the ship, no channel back to the open sea, only the burning sand and the empty sky. The heroes despaired. They had passed the clashing rocks and the wandering rocks and the sirens, and now it seemed they would die of thirst on a dry shore at the edge of a waterless waste, the ship useless beneath them. And then certain guardian spirits of that land appeared to Jason and told him what must be done. And so the Argonauts did the strangest deed of all their voyage. They lifted the great ship up out of the sand, all of them together, the whole crew, and they carried it on their shoulders across the burning desert, walking for many days under the hard sun. The famous heroes bowed beneath the weight of the vessel that had carried them so far, bearing it now in their turn, until at last they came to a great lake or inlet that opened by hidden ways back toward the sea. We will pass the thirst and the suffering of that crossing gently. We will only mark the strange tenderness of the image, the ship that had carried the men now carried by the men, the burden shared among all of them, no one excused, the whole company bent under the same weight, walking step by step across the sand toward the rumour of water. And in that desert, the old story says, they were guided to the sea at last by Triton, a god of the deep water, who rose from the inlet in the shape of a man and showed them the hidden channel that led back to the open Mediterranean, and pushed the ship out into the deep water with his own hands, and went down again beneath the waves. So even at the very edge of death in the waterless land, a power of the sea came up to set them on their way, and the long return resumed, and now at last the shores began to grow familiar, and the stars overhead began to be the stars they had known as boys, and the heroes knew that they were coming home. At length the Argo came home, back across the long water to the gulf beneath Mount Pelias, back to Iolcus, where the whole impossible voyage had begun so long before. Jason had done what Pelias swore he could never do. He had sailed to the edge of the world and returned, with the Golden Fleece glowing in the ship, and with the heroes who still lived, and with a foreign princess whose love and whose magic had made the whole thing possible. The ship that had opened the Eastern Sea, the first great vessel ever to make so long a passage and come back, was drawn up at last on its home shore, its long work done. And the Argonauts, the gathered flower of the heroic age, went their separate ways into their own stories, into the labours and voyages and wars that waited for each of them, into the songs that would be sung of them one by one, but bound forever, all of them, by the one great voyage they had made together. What became of Jason and Medea after the voyage is a longer and darker story, and we will only touch its very edge tonight, gently. The way one touches the edge of a thing one does not wish to disturb in the quiet of the night. Their love, which had begun on a far eastern shore under the working of a goddess and an arrow, did not bring them the long peace they had hoped for. There were betrayals ahead on both sides, and bitter griefs, and the slow, hard working out of the choices Medea had made when she turned her sacred art against her own father for a stranger's sake. But that is a story for another day, and not a story for the hour of sleep. Tonight we leave them at the bright moment of return, the fleece won, the voyage complete, the ship safe on its home shore, the long water crossed and crossed again, before the later sorrows had yet begun to gather on the far side of the happiness. Good evening and welcome back. If your mind has wandered out across the long water, the figures have multiplied. The displaced king and the usurping brother, the warning of the man with one sandal, the boy raised in the cave of the centaur, the old woman carried across the flooded river who was a goddess in disguise. The fleece hung golden in its grove at the end of the world, the great ship built with a speaking beam in its prow, the gathering of the heroes from every land, the soft island where they lingered too long. The friend killed in the dark and mourned in the morning, Hylas drawn down into the spring, and Heracles searching the shore. The brutal boxing king brought down by skill, the blind seer and the snatching wings driven off across the sky, the clashing rocks and the doves sent ahead, the hard sun king and the fire-breathing bulls. The princess struck with a love she did not choose, turning all night between her father and the stranger. The warriors springing from the sown field and falling on one another. The sleepless dragon sung at last to sleep. The flight across the unknown sea. The sirens answered with a sweeter song. The sea nymphs passing the ship hand to hand through the boiling water. The wedding in the cave with the fleece for a bed. The ship carried on the shoulders of the heroes across the burning sand. Let those images settle, like stones settling to the bed of a clear river, finding their places one by one in the long record of the voyage. There is a meaning the Greeks drew from the voyage of the Argo, and it is worth holding for a moment before we let the whole story loosen towards sleep. It is, more than almost any other Greek tale, a story about doing a great thing together. Jason was the leader, and the quest was his name, but he could not have sailed the ship alone, nor passed the clashing rocks alone, nor calmed the dragon alone, nor outsung the sirens alone, nor carried the ship across the desert alone. Every danger of the voyage was met by a different gift, brought by a different member of the crew. The strength of one, the sharp eyes of another, the wings of the sons of the wind, the seamanship of the helmsman, the music of Orpheus, the magic of Medea, the cool skill of the boxer. The voyage was a gathering of gifts, and it succeeded because no one aboard had to be good at everything, only good at the one thing the moment required, and willing to lend it freely to the others. The Greeks honored this. They understood that the great deeds of the world are almost never the work of a single pair of hands, but of many hands, each doing the part it was made for. It simply was, in the old imagination, that the world had edges, and that beyond the known harbours lay the unknown sea, and that to be young and brave was to feel the pull of those edges, to want to sail out past the last familiar headland toward whatever shining, difficult thing was rumoured to hang in a far grove at the end of the water. The voyage of the Argo was the Greeks' great story of that pull. It was the first long passage out into the unknown and the first safe return, and it stood, in their imagination, at the very head of the long history of human voyaging, the first ship to open the closed sea and come home again to tell of it. The beginning of all the journeys that would follow, and the old singers knew too that the going out was only half the tale, and perhaps the easier half. The Argo's voyage home was longer and stranger than its voyage out, full of trials that came after the great prize had already been won, when a lesser story would have simply sailed home in a line and ended. But the old tellers understood that getting the thing you set out for is not the end of the journey, only its turning point, and that the road back, carrying what you have won, is its own long labour. The heroes had the fleece in the ship from the moment they left Colchis, and still there were the sirens to pass, and the boiling strait, and the burning desert, and the whole wide sea between them and home. The winning was a single night by a sleeping dragon. The bringing home was many months of patient effort across half the world. The Greeks honoured the bringing home as much as the winning, for they knew that it is one thing to reach for a far bright treasure, and another thing entirely to carry it safely all the long way back to the place where it can finally be set down. And there is the gentler meaning, the one held in the figure of Medea by the sleeping dragon, and it is the meaning we will carry into the night. The hardest guardian in the whole story, the serpent that had never once in all its long ageless watch closed its eyes, was not overcome by strength, nor by the spear, nor by any hero's courage. It was sung to sleep. It was given, by the patient working of a quiet voice in the green dark, the rest it had never once been allowed to take. There is something in that for the listener tonight. Even the most sleepless of guardians can be given rest at last, when the right voice speaks the old soft words gently enough under the patient working of the night. The night is older now, and the story has carried us far. Let us gather the figures and let them settle. The port of Iolcus beneath the wooded mountain, looking out over its sheltered gulf. Chiron in his high cave, teaching the displaced prince the use of weapons and the names of the stars. The flooded river, the old woman who was a goddess, the sandal lost in the brown water. The golden ram flying eastward, and the grove where its fleece was hung. Argus building the great ship, and Athena setting the speaking oak beam in the prow. The heroes gathering from every land, the strong man, the musician, the twin brothers, the winged sons of the wind, the sharp-eyed watcher, the master helmsman, the seer who knew he would die. The soft island of Lemnos where they lingered too long. The friend killed in the darkness, mourned in the morning. Hylas vanishing into the still green pool, and the strongest of all heroes left calling his name among the trees. The savage boxing king brought down by the cooler and the quicker hand. The blind seer Phineus, and the foul snatching wings chased away across the sky. The island of bronze-winged birds, and the rescued grandsons of the king they sailed to rob. The clashing rocks, the dove loosed ahead, the great pull on the oars, the goddess's hand against the stone, the ship shooting through as the cliffs slammed shut behind. The seer and the helmsman lost in the eastern land, and the steering oar taken up by another. The hard-sun king at the foot of the Caucasus, the bulls of bronze and fire, the field ploughed and sown with teeth, the armed men rising and falling, the princess in her long night of choosing, 3 times setting out and 3 times turning back. The dragon coiled around the oak, its always open eyes sinking closed at last. The fleece glowing golden in Jason's hands in the dark. The long flight homeward across waters that had no names. Orpheus answering the sirens with a sweeter song. The sea nymphs cradling the ship through the boiling strait. The wedding in the cave on the western island. The great ship carried on the shoulders of the heroes across the burning sand, and the sea god rising to show them the channel home. These are the figures of the voyage, and you do not have to hold them. They are mentioned only so that they may settle. Let the names drift down like leaves into water. Let the images soften. Let the long story of the ship and its heroes become a quiet weight in the room, the way a great vessel drawn up on a calm shore is a quiet weight. Its sails furled, its oars shipped, its long crossing finished, asking nothing of anyone now but to rest on the sand under the stars. Now let the story loosen, the way every long telling must when sleep approaches. Let the Argo rest on its home shore, the water lapping quietly at its hull, its voyaging done. Let the Golden Fleece hang quiet now, its long guarding over, glowing softly in some safe and shadowed place where no one needs to watch it anymore. Let the dragon of the groves sleep on, deeply and without dreams, freed at last from the endless watch it was never once allowed to leave. Let the clashing rocks stand still and rooted forever at the mouth of the strait, their crashing ended, the gate open and silent. Let the sirens fall quiet on their island, their deadly song answered and outsung, and laid to rest. Let Orpheus lay down his lyre, the music done for the night. Let the helmsman rest his hand from the steering oar, the course held, the harbour reached at last. Let the winged sons of the wind fold their wings and be still. Let Heracles, far away on his lonely shore, find his own rest. Let the sea nymphs sink back beneath the calm water, their gentle work of cradling the ship long finished. Let the heroes who sailed together sleep, wherever their own stories carried them, the great crew scattered now across the world and across the years, but bound forever by the one voyage they made together. And let the sea itself grow calm. The long dark water that carried the ship to the edge of the world and home again, going quiet now under the night, moving softly in the dark, whether or not anyone is awake to watch it move. Good evening and welcome back, one last time, to the slow gentle work of letting the story rest. The night has carried the Argo a long way, from a flooded river in the north of Greece to the foot of the eastern mountains and home again across the unknown sea. There are many other tellings of the voyage, many other adventures along the way, many other heroes whose deeds the songs preserved. But that is a story for another day. The sea of this mythology is wide enough that no single knight can sail all its waters. There is a final image the old singers like to leave with their listeners at the end of the Argo's tale. It is the image of the great ship itself, long years later, drawn up on the shore where its voyaging had ended, growing slowly old in the sun and the salt air. The most famous vessel in the world resting quietly on the sand, remembered and honoured, its work long done. And the old story says that in the end the gods would not let so great a ship simply rot away upon a beach. And they took the Argo up and set it among the stars, lifting the whole shape of it into the southern sky to sail forever among the constellations. So on clear nights, far to the south, sailors could look up and see the outline of the first great ship riding high above them in the dark, its long voyage turned at last into light, its crossing made eternal. Sailing on among the stars where no rock can clash against it, and no sea can wear it down, and no harbour is ever quite reached, because for that ship, at last the sailing itself has become the rest. For now, remember this: tonight the work of the tale is done. It simply was, like all old stories, the carrying of the great ship and its heroes through the long inheritance of nights. Let the names settle, let the room settle, let the night gather you up. Imagine the long voyage of the Argo far behind you, the clashing rocks and the fire-breathing bulls and the sleepless dragon, and the unknown sea no longer pressing on your thoughts. In your mind, reach back and close an invisible door to the great water, feeling it move on silent hinges, sealing the ship, the fleece, the gathered heroes, and the long crossing in calm and order. Then see a single candle, its flame steady in the darkness. With a slow, gentle breath, blow that candle out, and let the last curl of light fade into the night. Rest well, sleep deeply, and let the ancient stories carry you into the night.